It's time for old Kenny here to get into the shop and get a little bit of attention. We've had this truck a little over a year. This is the truck that Ola accidentally bought on the auction. We were watching this truck with a couple of other items at an auction in Missouri. And I had to step away for a few minutes and I just said, just keep an eye on it. Let's see what it does. And, no big deal. We'll just watch it, see what it's going to do, see how it prices out. And as it got down close to the wire, she decided to bid on it, thinking, I'll just put a bid on it real quick. And then she kind of got caught up in the hype of all that. She really didn't bid more than once or twice and ended up winning it. But we didn't win anything else out of the auction. So I had to fly back to Kansas City and get this truck picked up and drive it back home. Anyway, we've had it a little over a year now. So I'm going to address a few things. We've got a headlight that's rattling. The mounts are broken or cracked or something. So I'm going to look at it, see if I can repair it for now while I wait for a headlight to come. The steering's been a little bit loose, so there's some front end parts that are loose. I've got two inner tie rods and a pitman arm that are bad. And I've decided I'm going to change both of the outer tie rods because the boots are pretty shredded on those. The joints aren't bad yet, but with the boots all torn out and who knows how long they've been taking mud and dirt and grit, they're bound to wear out really quickly if they aren't already. So I'm just going to replace inner tie rods, outer tie rods, and the pitman arm. It's due for an oil change. And I don't know, just a couple of little things like that really needs a little bit of attention. And Everest has started driving, and I want him to drive this because it's pretty tough and it can probably survive a teenage driver better than any of our fancier vehicles. Now that it's hot and it's warmed up good and everything, I'm gonna get the oil draining, and while that's draining, see if I can get this front tie rod done in 2 hours so that I can take this back to go get the boys picked up. Well, didn't want to jack that up. Need that like ½ inch. I didn't really want to jack it up too much because I kind of wanted the wheel position to stay in place. Most of the front end has dripped dry, so it's not dripping in my face, and I don't have big old chunks of dirt and debris falling in my eyes when I'm trying to rattle all this loose and get it off of there. While that's draining for a minute and this continues to finish dry, I'm going to go ahead and change the couple of bulbs in the back tail lights that were burned out. Buy myself a little bit of time to drips. guys. Great. Because I'm going to do both inner and outer tie rods and the pitman, I'm just going to take the whole steering linkage down, change the inners and outers, and what I'll do is on the bench, I'll measure from center of tie rod to center of idler and center of pitman to center of tie rod. It's on the two halves. And that will help me make sure that each tie rod length is pretty close. It's all I need it to be is pretty close for now. Last thing you want to do is replace them and have one side towed way out and the other side towed way out or in or something and be tearing tires apart just to get it in town for an alignment. If I'm off a little, it ain't a big deal. But as long as I'm real close, that'll get my steering tight enough and close enough that I can drive into town and get the wheel alignment done. I got the oil changed, all the steering components changed. Found a couple of problems here and there. The bump stop for the hood on the passenger side, there's what they call a nutsert. That nutsert had broken free, so the bump stop was loose. I attempted to braze it. As soon as I started warming it, I saw it quickly like deform in one location, and I pulled the heat away quick and waited for it to cool down and checked it, and sure enough, that cross piece is aluminum and the nut is steel, so it's never going to go in that way. Anyway, we'll worry about that another time. For now, I tried welding the plastic of that headlamp, and it's just not that kind of plastic. I don't know what kind it is, but whatever it does when it heats up, it just seems to turn into a powder. It doesn't melt into any kind of liquidity. So All of this is just temporary. I went ahead and put some Gorilla Glue on there because that kind of expands and really bonds to just about anything. Put a little bit of that on there, taped it in place to hold it sunk down into its like positioning of where it broke free from. And then while it was curing, I literally took some hot glue and just kind of encased the surrounding in hot glue and let that cure up just to hold it steady enough for the Gorilla Glue to hold. And again, it's just a temporary fix. I've got to order a headlamp and get it here and get it replaced. But for now, rather than having that thing flopping all over the place and you can't see where you're going, at least it'll be relatively pointed where it should. I got everything back in on the steering, and the steering wheel's pretty straight, and I drove back and forth 6 or 8 feet. When I put that all back together, I did not change the pitman arm because when I got it apart, the pitman arm felt strong and solid, and everything else was loose enough that I thought, well, maybe that was what I felt. And after putting it all back together and checking it again, I went down there with the truck running and manually turned the steering wheel shaft. And while I was down there, and could feel the pitman arm popping in the socket. So I'm gonna have to take that back off and replace the pitman arm. Unfortunately, with that particular gearbox in this truck, I have to unbolt the gearbox to rotate it enough to clear the cross member so that I can get the puller on there to pull it off the gearbox. And that should tighten everything else up. And then I'll call into town and see if we can get an appointment for an alignment. The other thing I'm gonna check before I have it into town for the alignment, I'm gonna double check the ride height. The reason I bring that up, when I look at this side over here, it looks like it's cambered out slightly. And this side looks like it runs true. Now that side is indicating a little bit of tire wear, which may fall in line with camber issue. But it also may just be a factor of having a few suspension components that were loose and floppy and causing some toe issues while it's running and a few things like that. But while I got it in here, it's real easy to check that first and make sure that my ride height is exactly where it should be on the front and everything's level and true. So I'm gonna call it a night for tonight. Tomorrow morning, I'll come back up and we will check those suspension components and make sure that everything's adjusted appropriately and in the right locations and change that pitman arm. And that should pretty well wrap up most of the things. There's a little bit of nuanced things that I want to check and fix and repair and whatever with this truck, but that would get us going enough. I'm going to call in the morning to see if they have an appointment for alignment. And if so, I will get these major things done, wrapped up, and then run the truck into town to get the alignment done so that everything's square and ready to go. All right, I'm back at it today. So I am going to start with that pitman arm. I need to jack it up to get clearance for the steering linkage to come down out of the way. And then I have to unbolt the gearbox and rotate it to get access to the pitman arm to be able to pull it off. They do make a low profile pitman arm puller that typically works on this series of truck that you can get up in there and there's just enough clearance that it can fit into place and then press the pitman arm off. I don't have one of those, I have a standard one, so it's not that much more work to unbolt the gearbox, rotate it, and then you can get the pitman arm puller in to press that arm off there. This truck has torsion bars for the front suspension, and they're adjustable, and it's not uncommon to have the truck in various applications, and then pretty soon you end up with the truck not riding at the appropriate level. And it's a real easy check to go underneath and measure the frame at 2 symmetric locations from the frame to ground and make sure that the ride height is appropriate. With that adjustment in place, the rest of the suspension falls right into line. And what I found was the driver's side was 3/8 of an inch lower than the passenger side at the frame height. So it's raising the front of the truck on the right side, on the passenger side, causing the truck to be slightly angled. And then as you go through bumps and maneuver and things like that, the right side's stiffer, the left side's softer. It's already angled like this. So then what happens is you get this boat action. It translates through on the rear end, and it feels like something is loose, or maybe the shocks are bad or things like that. And real easily, it's just the ride height isn't set appropriately. So I'm glad I checked it. It looked like somebody had been fiddling with those things. Probably when they put the heavier bumper on, they cranked them up to make it sit a little bit more level and look nicer. But if you don't do it well, then it causes problems. And I noticed that when we drove the truck home, that it just had that loose, wobbly feel. That was why it was so important for me to check that before I take it in for an alignment. I imagine the truck's going to handle flawlessly comparatively. Now we've got tight steering, we've got the suspension balanced. It's going to make quite a bit of difference. I ran into this when I was running fleets. We had a lot of this era of truck in the fleets that I had, and it was something we had to check, especially with service bodies on the back. You get these trucks into the fleet, and it'd be a work truck, and you put a service body on there, and then they'd load up all kinds of tools in each toolbox, depending on how they needed it, and supplies and materials and things like that. And then we'd bring the truck in after they get it all ready to go, brand new truck, we'd bring it in, and we check that ride height. We even had an ambulance with air ride suspension that was handling terribly. Previously, they'd been through 15 different sets of tires, thinking that it was a tire squash that was causing it. And they had handling issues at speeds. They would lane change, and they said the whole body would just shake and roll, and it felt unstable. And they swore up and down it was the tires. And I said, it just doesn't make sense. This is an air ride truck, and these are Freightliner M2 class ambulance, and they've got air ride rear suspension. And I said, there's no way, that thing should just be stable as ever. Crawled under it and checked it after we took a ride with them, and I thought, man, this thing does squash like crazy. We went underneath it and we checked it, and there was a 1/2 inch difference on the frame rails. So we adjusted the ride height on that air suspension and took it out, and the drivers, the guys that are assigned to this truck, and they're the ones that drive it, they said, man, this thing handles like a NASCAR now. It just corners like it's on rails. It has no issues. It just sits down where it should and just runs. And I said, man, I feel completely confident in this truck again. So ride height makes a huge difference when you're talking about independent suspension. I spent the rest of the day tearing into the dash and the hood and everything inside, and I didn't film any of it. This stuff doesn't film well unless you have some, I don't know, kind of cameras or something. So it's ready to go into town today for the alignment. They didn't have one yesterday. So this truck had an aftermarket DVD player and screen on the ceiling. Had all kinds of, like, a couple extra switches and extra wires and stuff that were just like kind of loose, and some things were hanging and things were not. And the DVD player itself seemed to turn on. So I thought, well, let's just check it and see. Went through some of those wires and got a few things connected up and powered up. And the screen itself is actually like destroyed. It's got big lines through it and stuff. It doesn't display anything other than just crazy geometric lights. That being bad, I have no interest in spending money to try to replace that screen or do anything like that. Rather than mess with any of that, I just pulled it all out, which is better for me anyway, because that allowed me to go in and fix a couple of areas that were going to become problems. They had used a few different types of splice taps and a few things like that into the factory wiring. And those always, over time, they have failures, they have problems, the moisture gets into them, things like that. They just never last well. So I was able to get all those things removed, all that extra wires out, all the extra, just stuff. That stuff drives me nuts. I used to do installs when I was running the fleets. We would do all of our own install for the safety lighting and accessory items, things like that. Plus, I used to do the police installs. And I learned quickly from doing repairs on the police cars all the things that drove me nuts about the way that they were installed. I can't tell you how many hours I spent repairing wiring on an install that was done poorly. After seeing all the problems with that, I just said, you know, we can fix this if we do the installation in-house and make sure that all of our connections are good. We used a whole different setup. Anyway, I won't get into all the detail, but anyway, I learned a passion for hating terrible install or quick install, I guess is the better way for it. The other thing with that, I guess, is that when we would take the vehicle out of service and send it out, it was very important for me to say, okay, we need to take the time to uninstall these things, pull out all the extra wiring and repair anything that had to be spliced, repair everything that was factory back to factory quality, so that it left here without all kinds of extras left in it. I just don't like that kind of thing. It's so common that it comes out of service and they just go, well, cut the wires that are routed through things, pull the devices out, anything that's hard mounted in places that are difficult to get to, forget it, leave it in place and just cut the wires to it and move on. Just wasn't my thing. So it feels good to have all of that stuff like eliminated and taken out and cleaned up. There's a few things in the interior that I want to look for to just make the truck a little bit nicer and tidied right up. The headliner's a little loosened because they had that DVD unit in the ceiling. There's a big hole in the center headliner. So I'll probably look for a new headliner or a salvage headliner, whatever I can get. Some tears in the seats that are common for this era of truck, so we'll probably look to do something like that. This truck's got a lot of life in it. It's only got 160,000 miles on it. So there's just no reason that it can't be a nice truck for a long time. Even though it's had its problems, it's got some, you know, dings and dents and things like that in it. That doesn't mean it can't be just given a little bit of TLC and tidied up. I need to bring it back in here and just do a final armor all cleaning on the interior to make sure it's all bright and shiny in there. So anyway, it's ready to go to the alignment. My Duramax that we had some issues on the last trip or two that we went to the auction is giving me some fits with a couple of things since we've gotten into the melt and all the rain and the mud and stuff like that. It's given me some sporadic issues, intermittent problems. I need to get that truck up here also, get it all power washed, get all the mud and dirt and debris off of it, get it in here and dried up, and then pull codes on it and see what the heck is going on with that thing. And one truck down. It's good to have that one done.